you ever walk into a room and instantly feel exhausted before anyone even speaks? Most people ignore that sensation. Empaths don't. Because genuine empaths are constantly scanning emotional environments without realizing it. Neuroscientists call this heightened emotional contagion, the brain's tendency to mirror the emotional states of others through specialized systems, often linked to mirror neuron activity, and that changes behavior in weird ways. Not fake online, I'm an empath because I cried during movies behavior. Real behavior. The kind that quietly destroys relationships, protects survival, and rewires daily life. Here are 7 weird things empaths do that only genuine empaths will understand. Number 1, they disappear without warning. Not because they hate people, because their nervous system hits overload. A genuine empath can spend 2 hours around loud, emotionally chaotic people and feel like they worked a 14-hour shift. Their brain processes emotional tension like background radiation. Tiny facial expressions, forced laughter, passive aggression, fake confidence, hidden resentment. Most people filter those signals out. Empaths absorb them. Research in psychology. Why psychology has shown that highly sensitive individuals often display increased activation in regions associated with emotional processing and awareness. That means the empath brain doesn't simply observe emotion, it experiences it. That's why genuine empaths randomly vanish from social media, ignore texts, cancel plans, or isolate for days. They aren't being dramatic, they're recovering neurologically. And the scary part? Most empaths feel guilty for doing it. So they force themselves to socialize longer than they should until burnout hits. Here's the solution most empaths never learn. Stop treating recovery like weakness. Athletes recover after physical strain. Empaths recover after emotional strain. If you're an empath, solitude is not laziness. It's maintenance. Number 2, they instantly know when someone is fake. This makes people uncomfortable because empaths usually can't explain how they know. They just know. A smile lasts half a second too long. A compliment feels rehearsed. The eyes disconnect from the words. The energy feels off. Behavior experts understand something important. Human communication is mostly nonverbal. Tone, microexpressions, timing, pupil dilation, vocal tension, facial asymmetry, the brain processes all of it subconsciously. Empaths unconsciously gather thousands of these tiny signals at once. That's why fake people feel physically irritating to them. And here's where life gets dangerous for empaths. They often ignore their instincts to avoid sounding judgmental. Big mistake. Some of the most manipulative people on earth survive because kind people override intuition with politeness. Empaths need to understand this. Your discomfort is data. Not every uneasy feeling means danger, but ignoring every uneasy feeling creates danger. Number 3, they absorb emotions that don't belong to them. This is one of the strangest experiences genuine empaths have. They wake up anxious for no reason, then realize someone around them is struggling emotionally. They suddenly feel heavy after talking to one specific person. Or they enter a happy mood only to become drained around negativity within minutes. Psychologists call part of this emotional contagion the automatic synchronization of emotions between individuals, and empaths are highly vulnerable to it, especially around chronic complainers, narcissists, wisties, emotionally unstable people, or trauma-driven personalities. Because the empath brain doesn't just hear emotion, it rehearses it internally. That means many empaths spend years carrying emotional pain that was never theirs to begin with. And eventually the nervous system starts collapsing under borrowed stress, sleep problems, overthinking, emotional exhaustion, decision fatigue, people-pleasing. This is why boundaries are survival tools for empaths, not personality preferences. Survival tools. You don't have to hate someone to limit access to your energy. That lesson changes everything. Number 4, they replay conversations for hours, sometimes days. Most people think empaths are emotional, but many are actually hyper-analytical, because empathy creates pattern recognition. They analyze tone changes, facial reactions, word choices, pauses, emotional inconsistencies. And afterward, the brain keeps reviewing the interaction, trying to answer one question. What did that person really mean? This is why empaths often struggle with anxiety. Their awareness never fully shuts off, And ironically, this makes them incredible at reading others, but terrible at reading. Laxing themselves. The solution is learning cognitive separation. Not every emotion requires investigation. Not every silence means rejection. Not every facial expression is about you. Healthy empaths learn to observe without attaching. That skill protects mental health more than almost anything else. Number 5, they feel exhausted in crowds, even when nothing bad happens. This confuses people. How can being around people make you tired? Because crowds create sensory overload, noise, movement, emotional unpredictability, social monitoring, energy shifts. The empath brain continuously tracks all of it. Studies involving highly sensitive people suggest they process environmental stimuli more deeply than average individuals. That means crowded environments don't just feel busy, they feel invasive. That's why genuine empaths often prefer quiet cafes over parties, nature over cities, deep conversations over group events. And no, that doesn't automatically mean introversion. Some empaths are socially skilled and charismatic, but afterward, they crash hard. If you're an empath, pay attention to this carefully. Your environment directly affects your nervous system. Protect your environment and your mental clarity improves dramatically. Number 6, they attract emotionally damaged people. This happens constantly. Why? Because wounded people feel safe around empathy. Empaths listen deeply. They validate emotions. They understand pain quickly. But this creates a dangerous pattern. Empaths become emotional rehabilitation centers for broken people. And eventually they confuse being needed with being loved. That sentence destroys lives. Because many empaths stay in toxic relationships far too long believing compassion can heal manipulation. It can't. Understanding someone's trauma does not excuse their abuse. And emotionally intelligent manipulators know exactly how to weaponize an empath's compassion. Most people think exhaustion comes from physical labor. But for empaths, exhaustion often comes from people, not conversations, not arguments, people. A genuine empath can walk into a room smiling and walk out emotionally shattered without understanding why. Because while everyone else hears words, the empath nervous system hears everything underneath them. The tension behind the smile, the sadness hidden in eye contact, the insect, purity buried inside confidence, the anger disguised as humor. And science suggests this isn't imagination. Researchers studying emotional contagion discovered that human beings unconsciously synchronize emotions with the people around them. Heart rates shift. Facial muscles mirror expressions automatically. Stress hormones rise simply from observing anxiety in others. In other words, emotions spread through groups almost like invisible viruses. But empaths experience this phenomenon at an entirely different intensity. Their brains process emotional information more deeply, more rapidly, and for longer periods of time. Some neuroscientists believe highly sensitive individuals show increased activity in brain regions connected to awareness, empathy, and emotional processing. That means the empath brain is not simply observing emotion, it is rehearsing it internally. Imagine carrying the emotional weight of every room you enter without even realizing it. That is how many empaths live every single day. And the terrifying part is this often begins in childhood. Many genuine empaths grew up in emotionally unpredictable environments where they had to become hyper-aware of mood chaos, needs to feel safe. They learned to study tone of voice like survival codes. Facial expressions became warning systems. Silence became danger. Emotional tension became something their nervous system monitored automatically. Over time, their brains adapted for emotional detection. But survival adaptations come with consequences, because eventually the empath loses the ability to distinguish between their own emotions and everyone else's. This is why so many empaths suddenly feel anxious without explanation. They absorb stress from workplaces, relationships, crowds, families, even strangers. One emotionally unstable person can shift the entire nervous system of an empath within minutes, and their body pays the price. Chronic emotional stress increases cortisol levels inside the body. Elevated cortisol has been linked to sleep disruption, weakened immunity, digestive problems, headaches, anxiety disorders, memory issues, and even cardiovascular strain. Some studies show long-term emotional stress may accelerate biological aging itself. Think about that. An empath surrounded by constant negativity is not merely feeling emotional, their body is physically absorbing stress chi. Mystery. This explains why many empaths feel exhausted after social interaction even when nothing bad happened. They weren't tired before entering the environment. But after hours of emotional scanning, subconscious analysis, and nervous system mirroring, the brain begins shutting down. That sudden fatigue isn't weakness, it's neurological overload. And yet society punishes empaths for this constantly. People call them dramatic, sensitive, antisocial, moody, difficult. But most empaths are not trying to disconnect from people. They are trying to recover from overstimulation. There's a reason many empaths disappear suddenly. They stop replying to messages, avoid crowds, cancel plans, spend long periods alone. And from the outside, it looks confusing. But internally, their nervous system is begging for silence because the empath brain rarely stops scanning. Even during simple conversations, empaths often analyze vocal tension, eye movement, emotional contradictions, suppressed anger, fake enthusiasm, and hidden sadness simultaneously. Their awareness operates in layers most people never consciously notice. That constant processing burns enormous mental energy. Studies on highly sensitive individuals suggest they process sensory input more deeply than average people. Noise feels louder. Conflict feels heavier. Emotional discomfort feels invasive. Their nervous systems react intensely to environments others barely notice. This is why crowded places drain empaths so quickly. A shopping mall, a family gathering, a loud restaurant, a workplace filled with tension. For most people, these are ordinary experiences. For empaths, they can feel like psychological warfare. And here is where life becomes dangerous, because many empaths ignore their own limits. They force themselves to stay available for everyone. They become emotional caretakers, therapists for friends, rescue systems for damaged people. They absorb pain trying to protect others from it. But the nervous system keeps score. Eventually, the body begins sending warnings: insomnia, brain fog, panic attacks, emotional numbness, chronic fatigue, loss of motivation. And sometimes the empath doesn't even realize the source of the problem because they've spent their entire life prioritizing other people's emotions above their own internal state. This creates one of the darkest patterns. WENS in empath psychology. They become addicted to emotional survival mode. Chaos feels normal. Overthinking feels normal, emotional exhaustion feels normal, and calmness actually feels uncomfortable because their nervous system has been trained to anticipate emotional danger constantly. That is why healing for an empath is not simply thinking positive. That is why healing for an empath is not simply thinking positive. It requires nervous system recoverable. Real recovery, silence, boundaries, sleep, isolation from toxic environments, time in nature, controlled social exposure, emotional separation. These are not luxuries for empaths. They are biological necessities. And one of the most important lessons an empath will ever learn is this: not every emotion you feel belongs to you. That realization changes lives. Because once empaths understand emotional absorption, they stop blaming themselves for every sudden mood shift. They stop carrying guilt for needing space. They stop forcing themselves into environments that destroy their mental clarity. And something incredible happens when they finally protect their energy. Their intuition sharpens. Their anxiety decreases. Their emotional awareness becomes an advantage instead of a curse, because the empath's sensitivity was never the real problem. The lack of boundaries was. A healthy empath becomes extraordinarily powerful. They read people accurately, detect manipulation quickly, build deep emotional trust, understand human behavior at a level most people never reach. And unlike manipulation, genuine empathy creates connection without control. That is rare. But none of that power appears until the empath learns one brutal truth: you cannot heal everyone without destroying yourself. And many empaths spend years learning that lesson the hard way. Some lose relationships trying to save broken people. Some lose their health absorbing everyone else's emotional chaos. Some completely disconnect emotionally because overload becomes unbearable. But the strongest empaths eventually realize something life-changing. Sensitivity is not weakness. unprotected sensitivity as weakness. There's a difference. Because once an empath learns emotional discipline, their awareness becomes almost superhuman. They notice lies faster, sense danger earlier, understand pain deeper, and recognize emotional patterns long before others do. What once overwhelmed, they become perception. And perception, in the modern world, is one of the rarest forms of power a human being can possess. The most dangerous thing about being an empath is not feeling too much. It's giving too much. Most empaths are not destroyed by hatred. They are destroyed by loyalty to people who never deserved access to them in the first place. Because genuine empaths have a psychological pattern that looks beautiful from the outside, but becomes catastrophic over time. They naturally absorb emotional pain, try to fix suffering, calm conflict, and rescue broken people. Their instinct is compassion. Their reflex is understanding. And because of that, they often become emotional shelters for the wounded, the manipulative, and the emotionally unstable. At first, it feels meaningful. The empath feels needed, important, valuable. But there is a dark psychological truth most empaths discover too late. Being needed is not the same as being loved. And some people will drain an empath for years while calling it connection. Science helps explain why this happens. Research in psychology shows that highly empathetic individuals often experience stronger emotional responses with others, meaning they feel distress more intensely when witnessing suffering. Their brains react rapidly to emotional pain, activating areas associated with emotional processing and social awareness. In simple terms, empaths don't just understand pain intellectually. They feel responsible for it emotionally. That is where boundaries begin collapsing. Because once someone's suffering enters the empath's nervous system, the empath feels compelled to relieve it. They overlisten, overgive, oversacrifice, overexplain. They tolerate disrespect because they can see the wounded child hiding behind toxic behavior. And this creates the perfect target for manipulators. Narcissistic personalities, emotionally chaotic people, chronic victims, and controlling individuals are often magnetically drawn toward empaths for one terrifying reason. Empaths keep giving even after the relationship becomes destructive. A manipulator sees boundaries as obstacles. An empath sees boundaries as guilt. That single difference changes entire lives. Many empaths grew up learning that love had to be earned through emotional labor. They became peacemakers in unstable homes, emotional caretakers for stressed parents, hyper-aware children who learn to suppress their own needs to maintain emotional stability around them. Over time, this creates a subconscious belief. If I can help enough, love will stay. But adulthood exposes the brutal consequences of that belief. Empaths often enter one-sided relationships where they become therapists instead of partners. They carry emotional burdens that were never theirs. They excuse betrayal because they understand trauma. They forgive endlessly because they see potential. They absorb disrespect, hoping compassion will eventually heal another person's darkness. But psychology reveals something painful. Understanding someone's trauma does not protect you from their behavior. A person can be wounded and still destroy your mental health. A person can be hurting and still manipulate you. A person can cry and still lie. And empaths struggle with this reality because their compassion overrides self-protection. That is why boundaries are not selfish for empaths. They are survival mechanisms. Without boundaries, the empath nervous system enters chronic stress mode. The body begins producing elevated cortisol for long periods of time. Chronic stress has been linked to immune dysfunction, anxiety disorders, depression, digestive problems, sleep disruption, memory impairment, inflammation, and cardiovascular strain. In other words, toxic emotional environments physically damage the body, and empaths often stay inside those environments far longer than other people would. Why? Because they confuse endurance with love. But enduring emotional pain is not proof of loyalty. Sometimes it's proof you abandoned yourself. This is why so many empaths wake up one day emotionally numb. They no longer recognize themselves. They feel exhausted around people they once loved. They become irritable, detached, anxious, and mentally foggy. Not because they stopped caring, because their nervous system finally hit survival mode. And the frightening part is many empaths feel guilty for creating distance from toxic people. They worry about appearing cold. They fear hurting others. They convince themselves they are overreacting. Meanwhile, their body continues absorbing stress like poison. That guilt becomes deadly, because manipulators often weaponize empathy itself. They use phrases like, "You're the only person with the understands me. I need you. You're abandoning me. If you leave, I'll fall apart. And the empath stays. Not because they are weak, because their nervous system has been conditioned to associate self-sacrifice with emotional value. But eventually reality catches up. The empath realizes something devastating. No amount of love can heal someone who refuses accountability. That lesson changes everything, because healthy empathy was never supposed to mean emotional self-destruction. Real empathy requires wisdom, and wisdom understands limits. A healthy empath learns that protecting peace is more important than rescuing chaos. They stop explaining boundaries repeatedly to people committed to violating them. They stop absorbing responsibility for emotions they did not create. They stop believing kindness must come at the cost of mental health. And this transformation shocks people, especially toxic people. Because once an empath develops boundaries, manipulative individuals lose access to emotional control. The empath who once tolerated everything suddenly becomes unreachable to dysfunction. And people often call this coldness, but it's not coldness. It's right. Cavalry. One of the most important psychological shifts an empath can experience is learning the difference between empathy and emotional fusion. Empathy says, "I understand your pain." Emotional fusion says, "Your pain is now my responsibility." That second mindset destroys lives, because humans are not designed to carry the emotional weight of everyone around them indefinitely. The nervous system cannot sustain constant emotional overload without consequences. Studies show chronic interpersonal stress can alter mood regulation, increase anxiety sensitivity, and contribute to emotional burnout. This is why boundaries improve more than relationships. They improve biology. Sleep improves. Stress decreases. Mental clarity returns. Energy stabilizes. And suddenly the empath realizes something almost unbelievable. Peace feels unfamiliar because chaos became normal. That realization is painful, but it is also freedom. Because the strongest empaths are not the ones who save everyone. They are the ones who finally learn to save themselves too. And once that happens, empathy transforms into something extraordinarily powerful. Instead of being emotionally consumed by OT, the empath becomes emotionally aware without drowning. They can recognize manipulation without absorbing it. They can care deeply without self-abandonment. They can love without sacrificing mental stability. That is true emotional intelligence, not endless tolerance, not self-erasure disguised as kindness. Real emotional intelligence is knowing when compassion becomes self-destruction. And the moment an empath finally understands that, their entire life changes. Because boundaries do not block love. They reveal who is capable of respecting it. The world teaches empaths to see their sensitivity as a flaw, too emotional, too intense, too sensitive, too affected by everything. But history hides a different truth. The very traits that make empaths struggle in chaotic environments are often the same traits that make them extraordinarily perceptive, socially intelligent, and psychologically powerful once they learn control. Because sensitivity, when untrained, feels like suffering. But sensitivity, when disciplined, becomes perception. And perception changes everything. Most people move through life half-aware. They hear words but miss intention. They see smiles, but ignore emotional contradiction. They notice behavior but fail to detect patterns underneath it. Empaths are different. They notice the hesitation before the answer, the tension behind confidence, the sadness hidden inside humor, the exhaustion behind forced positivity. Their brains are constantly processing emotional information beneath the surface of normal conversation. And science suggests this ability is very real. Research involving highly sensitive individuals has shown increased responsiveness to emotional and social stimuli. Some neuroscientists believe certain people process environmental and emotional information more deeply due to heightened activity in brain systems connected to awareness, empathy, and social interpretation. In simple terms, the empath brain notices more, but early in life this awareness often feels like a curse. Because children with heightened emotional sensitivity usually grow up overwhelmed before they grow up empowered. Loud households feel unsafe. Emotional tension feels physically painful. Criticism cuts deeper. Rejection lingers longer. Chaos becomes emotionally exhausting. And because society rewards emotional suppression instead of emotional awareness, many empaths spend years believing something is wrong with them. But what if the problem was never sensitivity itself? What if the real problem was living without emotional training? Because uncontrolled sensitivity creates anxiety. Controlled sensitivity creates insight. That distinction changes lives. Most empaths begin their journey emotionally overloaded. They absorb stress from everyone around them. They struggle with boundaries. They become exhausted in crowds. They overthink interactions for hours. Their nervous system constantly scans for emotional danger. But eventually, some empaths learn something powerful. Awareness can be directed. Instead of drowning in emotional information, they begin organizing it, observing instead of absorbing, analyzing instead of reacting. And suddenly, the same nervous system that once overwhelmed them becomes an advanced social radar. They start detecting lies quickly, not because they're psychic, because humans leak emotion constantly. Micro-expressions flash across the face in fractions of a second. Vocal tension shifts under stress. Body language changes when someone feels threatened, insecure, deceptive, DIV, or emotionally disconnected. Research in behavioral psychology has repeatedly shown that emotion affects physical behavior whether people realize it or not. Most people miss these signals. Empaths often don't. That's why mature empaths frequently develop astonishing intuition about people. They sense manipulation before evidence appears. They detect emotional instability early. They recognize hidden resentment, dishonesty, insecurity, or emotional pain long before others do. And this creates a strange experience many genuine empaths understand deeply. They often know the truth emotionally before they can prove it logically. At first, this can feel confusing, even frightening, because society teaches people to distrust intuition unless there is immediate evidence. But the empath brain is often collecting thousands of subconscious behavioral signals at once. Tiny inconsistencies, facial tension, energy shifts, tone changes, eye movement, timing, silence. And over time, the brain builds emotional pattern recognition from repeated exposure. This is not magic. It is advanced observation happening beneath conscious awareness. The problem is that many empaths speak second years ignoring these instincts to avoid sounding judgmental. And that mistake becomes costly. Because the ability to perceive emotional danger early is one of the most valuable survival skills a human can possess. Studies on intuition and unconscious processing suggest the brain often detects threats or inconsistencies before conscious reasoning fully catches up. That uneasy feeling empaths experience around certain people is not always paranoia. Sometimes it is pattern recognition firing below awareness. And when empaths finally learn to trust healthy intuition, their entire life begins changing. They choose relationships more carefully, avoid manipulative personalities faster, protect their energy more intelligently, and build deeper emotional connections with trustworthy people. Because sensitivity, when guided correctly, creates emotional precision. But there is another side to empath power few people talk about. Empaths often become exceptional communicators. Why? Because people feel understood around them, and humans are biologically drawn toward emotional safety. Research in psychology consistently shows that feeling emotionally validated reduces stress regarding responses inside the nervous system. When people feel seen, heard, and understood, their bodies literally relax. Heart rate decreases. Defensive behavior lowers. Emotional openness increases. Empaths naturally create this effect. Not through manipulation, through presence. They listen deeply, notice emotional detail, recognize unspoken pain, respond with emotional accuracy. And in a world filled with distraction, emotional performance, and superficial interaction, genuine understanding becomes rare. That rarity becomes power. This is why healthy empaths often excel in leadership, psychology, counseling, negotiation, teaching, art, communication, caregiving, and human-centered professions. They understand emotional dynamics most people overlook completely. but the most powerful transformation happens when empaths stop seeing themselves as emotional victims. Because once emotional discipline develops, the empath nervous system becomes remarkably resilient. They learn boundaries, recovery, observation, emotional separation, self-regulation, and the sensitivity that once caused suffering becomes sharpened awareness instead. That is when the empath becomes dangerous to man. Population. Because manipulators survive through emotional blindness in others. But emotionally intelligent empaths eventually see through performance quickly. They recognize love bombing, gaslighting, passive aggression, emotional inconsistency, false vulnerability, control disguised as affection. And once seen clearly, manipulation loses power. That is why healed empaths often intimidate toxic people without even trying. Their awareness exposes emotional dishonesty naturally, and perhaps the most important truth of all is this: empaths are not weak because they feel deeply. Most people avoid emotional depth because it requires courage. Empaths live inside emotional depth constantly. The challenge is learning not to drown there. And once they master that balance, something extraordinary happens. Their emotional awareness becomes clarity. Their intuition becomes guidance. Their compassion becomes strength instead of self-destruction. And the same person who once felt overwhelmed by the world becomes someone capable of understanding human behavior with terrifying accuracy. Because emotional intelligence is not softness, it is advanced awareness. And in a world where most people barely understand themselves, the ability to truly understand human emotion becomes one of the rarest and most powerful abilities a person can develop. That is the hidden truth about genuine empaths. Their sensitivity was never meant to break them. It was meant to awaken them.